Officer Daniel never planned on buying a house, especially not a cave hidden deep inside an abandoned mountain trail. When he bought the abandoned cave house for just $400, everyone in town laughed, calling it a worthless hole in a rock, forgotten by the world. But Daniel wasn't looking for luxury. He wanted silence, healing, a place where the nightmares couldn't follow him, and the cave's hidden beauty felt strangely familiar. The locals warned him that the place wasn't normal. Strange noises, missing hikers, stories no one wanted to repeat. But the officer didn't care about the warnings. Because the moment he stepped inside, his K9 partner, Shadow, froze, hackles raised, then bolted toward a sealed corner of the cave, barking with a desperation Daniel had never heard before. "Shadow, what is it?" Daniel asked, but the dog wouldn't stop. When Daniel finally broke through the stone wall, he uncovered a room no one knew existed, and the truth about who once hid. There would shake the entire town and expose a secret buried for years. Stay with us, because this story will leave you speechless. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Officer Daniel Reed had seen strange things during his years in law enforcement, but nothing as bizarre as the real estate listing that popped up on his screen late one quiet evening. Cave house for sale, $400. Remote, fully built interior cabin, serious buyers only. He blinked, wondering if it was a joke. Houses didn't cost $400, not even broken ones, and certainly not ones hiding inside a mountain. He scrolled through the photos, each image stranger than the last. A wooden cabin tucked deep inside a cavern, a stone chimney, a hand-carved door, patches of sunlight spilling through natural cracks in the rock. It looked ancient and abandoned, yet strangely maintained. Something about it didn't add up. Daniel showed the listing to a few officers during the morning briefing. They laughed, shaking their heads. "Scam," one said. "Haunted," another joked. "Or someone's trying to lure you into the mountains and rob you." Daniel shrugged it off at first, but the images lingered in his mind. There was something peaceful, almost inviting, about that hidden little home, like it held a story waiting to be uncovered, and Daniel, with his quiet personality and love for solitude, felt drawn to it more than he cared to admit. On his day off, curiosity finally got the best of him. He emailed the seller, expecting no reply. Instead, he received a message within minutes. "Cash only. No negotiation. Meet at trail entrance. I'll guide you." No name, no details. Weird, but still irresistible. The next morning, Daniel drove into the mountains with Shadow, his loyal German Shepherd K9 partner, sitting, proudly, in the back seat. The seller, a thin older man with nervous eyes, handed Daniel a simple handwritten deed, took the cash, and left without a word. He didn't even look Daniel in the eye. Red flag. Huge red flag. Daniel hiked the remaining mile with Shadow trotting ahead, nose twitching at every scent. When they finally reached the cave entrance, Daniel stopped in his tracks. There it was, just like the photos. A small log cabin sitting inside an enormous cavern, shafts of light illuminating its roof like a spotlight. Dust motes drifted through the air, dancing in silence. It felt isolated, untouched, almost frozen in time. Daniel smiled despite himself. "Well, buddy," he said to Shadow, "looks like we just bought a cave." But Shadow didn't wag his tail. Instead, he lowered his head, ears pricking forward, body tense. As Daniel took his first step toward the cabin, Shadow let out a low, warning growl. Something inside that cave house wasn't right, and Shadow sensed it immediately. Daniel stepped cautiously across the rocky floor, the echo of his boots bouncing eerily off the cavern walls. The air felt different inside, colder, heavier. Shadow moved ahead but slowly, tail stiff, nose skimming the ground like he was tracking something invisible. Every few steps, the dog paused, ears twitching toward the wooden cabin as though listening for a sound Daniel couldn't hear. "Easy, boy," Daniel murmured, though even he could feel the uneasiness brushing against his skin. He reached for the cabin door. The wood looked old, weathered, and rough to the touch, yet unnervingly solid, like someone had repaired it recently. Daniel pushed it open and it creaked sharply as if protesting the intrusion. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly intact. A small wooden table, a single chair, a narrow bed frame made from logs. Dust coated everything, but not as thickly as Daniel expected. Someone had lived here, not decades ago, but maybe years, maybe months. Shadow moved inside first, sniffing every corner with laser focus. He let out a quiet whine and pressed his nose against the wall near the window. His ears flattened, not from fear, but from recognition. Daniel frowned. "What is it, boy?" Shadow didn't respond. Instead, he walked to the opposite corner and repeated the same intense sniffing. Something about the scent was getting to him. Daniel scanned the room. The walls were uneven logs, dried but sturdy. A handmade shelf sat crookedly above the bed, holding a rusted lantern and a few small stones arranged neatly, as if placed with intention, not randomness. The floorboards, though dusty, showed faint pathways where footsteps had repeatedly walked. Then Daniel noticed something unsettling. The dust patterns stopped. He crouched, running a gloved finger across the floor. A clean line ran through the dust, perfectly straight, leading to the back corner of the cabin. Not natural, not accidental, like a board had been moved or replaced. "Someone spent time here," Daniel muttered. "Recently." Shadow suddenly swung his head toward the cabin entrance, giving a sharp, alert bark. Daniel's heart jumped. He rushed to the doorway and peered out into the cavern, but the space was empty, quiet except for the faint drip of water echoing through the stone tunnels. Still, the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt watchful. Daniel stepped back inside, eyes narrowing. The cabin wasn't abandoned. It was paused, left behind by someone who either planned to return or left in a hurry. Shadow stood rigid near the back wall, hackles raised. Whatever scent lingered there had stirred something deep inside him, and Daniel knew this was only the beginning. Shadow's posture shifted so suddenly that Daniel froze mid-step. The German shepherd lowered his head, muscles tightening as he moved toward the rear cabin wall with slow, deliberate steps. His tail stiffened straight behind him, hackles rising like bristles. He wasn't curious now. He was alert, focused, ready. Daniel felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Shadow. Talk to me, buddy." Shadow pressed his nose against the wooden wall and inhaled sharply, then again, faster this time. A low rumble vibrated in his chest. He wasn't just detecting something. He was warning. Daniel approached slowly. The wood looked normal, aged, rough, nothing unusual. But when he tapped it with his knuckles, the sound echoed differently. Hollow, empty. Shadow pawed at the baseboard, claws scraping sharply. Dust scattered. Beneath it, Daniel saw something the previous owner had never mentioned. A split between the boards, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. "What's behind there?" Daniel whispered. Shadow barked once, loud and sharp, the kind he'd been trained to use during search and rescue operations when locating trapped individuals. That bark had saved lives before. Hearing it inside a forgotten cave cabin sent Daniel's pulse racing. The dog began scratching with urgency now, sending wooden chips flying. He wasn't behaving randomly. He was signaling, insisting. Whatever was behind that wall mattered. Daniel grabbed a flashlight and shined it along the wooden planks. Tiny fibers, rope fibers, were caught between the cracks. Old, frayed strands, barely visible. Why would rope be wedged behind a cabin wall? Shadow backed up suddenly and planted himself between Daniel and the wall, barking again, louder this time. Not aggressive, protective, as if the scent behind that wall wasn't just familiar, but dangerous. Daniel's mind raced. Shadow only reacted like this under two conditions. Someone had been hurt, or someone had been hiding. He crouched to Shadow's level and rested a hand on the dog's shoulders. "What did you find, boy?" Shadow didn't look away from the wall, not for a moment. Daniel swallowed hard. The hollow wall, the rope fibers, the dust paths that abruptly stopped. This wasn't a simple abandoned shelter. Someone had been hidden there, and something told Daniel that whoever it was, they hadn't left by choice. Daniel stood slowly, brushing dust from his hands as Shadow continued staring at the hollow wall like it held a heartbeat. The air felt different now, thicker, charged. Daniel scanned the room again, this time with sharper eyes. If someone had hidden here, they would have left traces beyond dust and rope fibers. His gaze landed on a wooden support beam near the bed. Something on its surface caught the flashlight's glare. Fine, almost delicate scratches. He stepped closer, lifting the beam toward the light. They weren't random scratches. They were initials, carved carefully, almost reverently. A.R. Next to them, a date. Daniel frowned. It wasn't from the 1950s or 1980s like he expected from an old mountain hideaway. It was from 3 years ago. Shadow patted over, sniffing the beam. The moment his nose touched the carved letters, he stiffened, his ears pricked forward, and he emitted a soft, aching whine. A recognition sound. Not fear. Memory. Shadow? Daniel leaned down. "Do you know this scent?" Shadow touched the beam again with his nose, then backed away, pacing in a slow circle around the cabin interior. Each time he passed the beam, he glanced at it sharply, ears tilting as though the carved letters whispered something only he could hear. Daniel's stomach tightened. "A.R.," he murmured. "Who were you?" He took out his phone, snapping photos of the carving. There were more marks, tiny lines, etchings that looked rushed, almost desperate. Some formed shapes Daniel didn't understand. Symbols, patterns, possibly codes. Shadow returned to the corner where he had earlier detected the hollow space. He pressed his snout flat against the wood. His tail lowered, not in fear, but in sorrow. Then he nudged the wall gently, as though urging Daniel to understand. Daniel knelt beside him. "Hey, it's okay. We'll figure this out." But the more he looked, the more the cabin shifted from mysterious to tragic. Someone hadn't just lived here, they had hidden here, and they had done it for long enough to carve initials, etch dates, mark symbols, and leave scents strong enough for a trained K9 to still recognize years later. Why was Shadow reacting like this? Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, recalling every case file he'd ever read. Those initials. A chill spread through him. Could they belong to someone reported missing? Before he could follow the thought, a sudden gust of cold air rushed through the cabin, sweeping dust into spirals. Shadow snapped his head toward the floor, growling deep in his chest. Daniel's flashlight beam swept downward. And that's when he saw it. A worn, woven rug slightly lifted at one corner, as if someone had pulled it up many times. Shadow took a step forward. Whatever lay beneath that rug was the next piece of the truth. Shadow moved toward the rug with slow, deliberate steps, every muscle tight with instinct. Daniel felt the tension in the air sharpen, as if the cave itself were holding its breath. The rug looked ordinary. Faded patterns, torn edges, nothing unusual, but it wasn't lying flat. One corner was slightly curled upward, lifted, disturbed. Daniel knelt and pinched the edge between two fingers. The fabric felt cold, heavy, like it had absorbed years of fear. "Okay, boy," he whispered. "Let's see what you found." He pulled. The rug peeled back with a soft scrape, releasing a faint cloud of dust. Shadow lowered his head, nose working furiously. Beneath the rug lay a wooden panel. Old, handcrafted, reinforced with iron hinges that didn't match the age of the cabin. Daniel frowned. Someone had installed this hatch deliberately. And recently. Shadow gave a sharp bark. Daniel pressed his fingers against the panel. It didn't budge. He tried again, pushing harder. The wood groaned from the pressure before finally lifting with a reluctant, haunting creak. Cold air surged upward, carrying with it the damp, earthy smell of deep underground passages. Daniel angled his flashlight into the darkness. A ladder descended into a narrow chamber below. The steps were dusty but not untouched. Footprints marked where someone had climbed down many times. Some prints were small, light, human. Shadow whined softly. Daniel took a deep breath and lowered himself onto the ladder. His boots touched the ground of the chamber, and instantly he felt the temperature drop several degrees. Shadow jumped down beside him with practiced ease. The chamber was small, barely tall enough to stand. The walls were rough stone, but the floor had been smoothed intentionally. Against one side was a makeshift bed, torn blankets piled over flattened cardboard. Nearby lay candle stubs melted into rock, their last flames extinguished long ago. Someone lived here. Someone hid here. And they had done it in the shadows beneath the cabin. Daniel swallowed hard. This wasn't a hunter's hideout or a traveler's refuge. This was a place of survival. A place for someone who couldn't go home. He noticed faint scratches on the wall, tally marks, counted days, weeks, maybe months. Shadow nosed at a small metal cup on the ground. Inside was residue of something. Water, maybe food. Daniel felt unease tightening in his chest. Why would someone hide under a cave house? Why build a secret chamber? Who was A.R.? And most importantly, where were they now? Shadow stepped forward, tail lowered, gaze fixed on the far wall. Something else was still hidden here. And Daniel wasn't leaving until he found it. Daniel swept the beam of his flashlight slowly across the cramped underground chamber. Every surface bore signs of long, desperate survival. Worn blankets, scavenged supplies, makeshift repairs. Nothing here belonged to a traveler passing through. Someone had lived under this cabin like a ghost, unseen and unheard by the world above. Shadow paced the tiny room, nose to the ground, sniffing with growing urgency. He paused near a cluster of rocks stacked neatly in one corner. Daniel frowned. Rocks didn't stack themselves. He crouched and carefully shifted them aside. Something glinted beneath. A waterproof pouch. Dirty, but intact. Daniel reached for it, heart pounding. Shadow whined softly, tail low, as though sensing the weight of what Daniel had uncovered. He unzipped the pouch with shaking fingers. Inside was a notebook, thin, bent, the cover creased and stained from handling. A single name was written on the front, but dust obscured it. Daniel brushed it gently. A.R. The same initials carved into the beam upstairs. He opened the notebook. The first page was written in hurried, uneven handwriting. If anyone finds this, it means he came back. I don't know how long I have left. Maybe none. Daniel's chest tightened. Shadow laid down. Beside him, head resting on Daniel's knee, eyes fixed on the pages. Daniel turned to the next entry. I can't stay near town. They're still looking for me. They know I know the truth. Another page. I heard voices last night. They were close. I think they found the trail again. I have to be careful. The handwriting shifted over time, some trembling, some faint, some written with confidence. Whoever this person was, they lived in constant fear. Then something darker appeared. Drawings, symbols, patterns, triangles intersecting circles, lines that looked like coded roots, repeated phrases in small, cramped writing. He works with the police. He can't be trusted. Daniel froze. He works with the police? Who? Shadow sat upright suddenly, ears forward as Daniel read the next line. "I overheard him talking on the radio. He said I'd never be found alive." Daniel inhaled sharply. Shadow growled low, not aggressively but with recognition, as if one of the cents on the notebook pages belonged to someone he knew, someone he didn't like. Daniel flipped to the back. Several pages were missing, ripped out violently. The torn edges looked fresh compared to the rest of the notebook. Someone had removed something important. Maybe evidence, maybe names. "If I disappear, tell my family I tried. I really tried." At the bottom of the last page, a final message was scratched so deeply into the paper it nearly punctured it. "Don't trust him." Daniel slowly closed the notebook, his hands trembling. The chamber felt colder now. Who was him? What truth did AR discover? And why did Shadow react as though the scent inside these pages was terrifyingly familiar? Daniel straightened, eyes sharp with determination. This wasn't just a mystery. This was a warning. Daniel climbed out of the underground chamber with the notebook clutched tightly in his hand. His mind raced. The carvings, the hidden room, the warnings inside, those pages. This wasn't a random vagrant hiding out. This was someone running from a threat, someone who believed that threat came from inside law enforcement. Shadow followed him up the ladder, ears pinned back, body tense. Whatever scents he detected were disturbing him in a way Daniel had rarely seen. Back inside the cabin, Daniel exhaled shakily and pulled out his radio. "Dispatch. This is Officer Reed. I need to speak to Lieutenant Harris. Urgent." Static crackled, then a familiar voice answered. "Reed, what's going on?" Daniel hesitated, glancing at the notebook. "I need information on a missing person case. Initials AR, possibly from 3 years ago." There was a pause, too long to be normal. The kind of pause that didn't come from searching records, but from deciding how to respond. Finally, Harris spoke again, his tone strangely clipped. "Leave it alone, Reed. That case is closed." Daniel frowned. "Closed? I didn't even give you the full name." "I said, drop it." Harris's voice hardened. "It's old and irrelevant. Don't dig into things that don't concern you." Shadow growled at the radio, an immediate instinctive reaction. His fur bristled, his body going rigid. He recognized the voice, and he didn't like it. Daniel's pulse quickened. "Lieutenant, with respect, someone hid in this cave. There's evidence." "Reed," Harris interrupted sharply. "Stop. Pack up whatever you're doing and get back to town. Do not continue this investigation." That's an order. The radio clicked off before Daniel could respond. Silence filled the cabin. Shadow stared at the radio with cold intensity, teeth barely visible beneath a low, rumbling growl. Daniel knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Easy, boy." But he understood Shadow's reaction. Harris had never spoken like that before. Not to him, not on any case. Why was he so desperate to shut it down? Daniel glanced at the notebook again, at the line written in shaky ink. "He works with the police." A chill spread through him. Whoever AR was afraid of, whoever she heard on the radio that night. Shadow's reaction suggested something terrifying. Daniel knew that voice, and now he wasn't sure who he could trust. Night fell over the mountains faster than Daniel expected. One moment, the sky glowed orange through the cave opening. The next, darkness seeped into every corner like ink spreading across paper. Daniel lit the lantern he'd found upstairs, placing it on the cabin table. Its flickering glow cast long, trembling shadows across the wooden walls. Shadow remained restless, pacing back and forth in tight circles. Every sound, the drip of water, the shifting of loose stones, the distant wind, made him snap his head toward the cavern entrance. He kept returning to Daniel's side, nudging his leg as if urging him to leave. "I know, boy. Daniel whispered. Something's not right. But leaving wasn't an option. Not now. Not after what he found. Too many questions hung in this air, heavy, unanswered, dangerous. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, notebook in hand. He reread AR's words under the dim lantern light. Fear etched every sentence. Loneliness seeped from the pages. Someone had hunted her. Someone she believed wore a badge. Shadow suddenly stiffened. Daniel froze. The dog's nose lifted slightly, nostrils flaring. His ears stood rigid. His body angled toward the cave entrance, gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the cabin. A sound followed. Soft, slow, deliberate, crunch, footsteps. Daniel stood instantly, hand drifting toward his holster. Shadow moved ahead of him, silent now, shoulders low, the quiet intensity of a trained K-9 ready to confront a threat. Another crunch echoed, louder this time. Whoever, or whatever, was outside wasn't trying to hide. They were approaching with confidence. Daniel whispered, "Lights off." He doused the lantern. The cabin plunged into darkness. Only faint moonlight filtered through cracks in the cave ceiling, casting thin, ghost-like lines across the room. Shadow crept forward, muscles rippling beneath his dark coat. Daniel's heartbeat thudded in his ears. Then another sound broke the silence. A metallic clatter near the cave mouth. Not a rock, not an animal. Something man-made. Daniel moved beside Shadow, eyes adjusting slowly to the dark. He peered toward the cave entrance, and for a moment he saw nothing. Then, movement. A silhouette standing just outside the cabin's wooden threshold. Still, watching. Daniel's hand tightened around his flashlight, but he didn't turn it on. "Hello," he called evenly. No answer. Shadow growled, deep and guttural. The figure shifted, then vanished into the darkness without a sound. Daniel rushed forward, stopping just outside the cabin. Nothing. No footsteps. No breathing. No retreating sounds. Whoever had been there disappeared as if swallowed by the cave itself. But something else caught his eye. On the ground near the entrance lay a small plastic container, newer than anything inside the cabin. He picked it up. Inside were crumbs of dried food. Someone had placed it there recently. Shadow sniffed it, tail dropping lower. Daniel's blood went cold. This wasn't an abandoned hideout. Someone had been returning, feeding themselves, checking the place, or feeding someone else. Daniel turned slowly, scanning the darkness. Had AR come back? Had someone else taken over the cave? Or worse, had the person hunting her found the trail again? Shadow barked once, sharp and urgent. Daniel didn't need an interpretation. They weren't alone. The cave had a visitor, and whoever stood outside that cabin wasn't lost, curious or harmless. They came to see the hideout. They came because they knew someone had been living here. They came because this cave still mattered. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat, with his back against the cabin wall, flashlight in hand, Shadow curled at his side but wide awake, ears twitching with every distant echo inside the cavern. The mysterious visitor's silent retreat replayed in Daniel's mind again and again. Someone had come here. Someone who knew this place. Someone who wasn't afraid of the dark paths that carved through this mountain. And someone who might know exactly who AR was. As the first hints of dawn seeped through the cave's cracks, Daniel reopened the notebook. He turned to the drawings, the codes, the desperate words scribbled across uneven pages. The initials, AR, appeared on the cover, carved on the beam upstairs, and written repeatedly as though the writer feared being forgotten. Daniel whispered the letters aloud. A-R. Shadow lifted his head at the sound. His ears perked. His eyes sharpened. He recognized the name, or rather the scent associated with it. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Shadow. You knew. Her, didn't you? Shadow pressed his nose against the notebook again, inhaling deeply, his tail lowered in a slow, sorrowful motion. It was confirmation enough. Daniel stood and walked outside the cabin into the cavern entrance, taking out his notepad. He went through every missing person case he could recall. Names, faces, ages. None matched AR. Then he paused, remembering something. A case brief from 3 years ago. A teenage girl. Brilliant, quiet, and highly observant. She had vanished without a trace. Abigail Rowan. AR. A chill cut through him. Her case had been closed abruptly. The official statement claimed she likely ran away. But the timeline, the handwriting, the fear in her words. This notebook was hers. She had lived here, hidden here, survived here. But the reason for her disappearance was even more unsettling. Daniel flipped to a page filled with frantic scribbles. I heard them talking again. They said I knew too much. He said I'd never leave, never, this mountain alive. I didn't want to hear the truth, but he works with the police. Daniel swallowed hard. Abigail Rowan had uncovered something dangerous, something connected to law enforcement. Someone had chased her into these mountains, but who? He grabbed the radio. Dispatch, patch me into missing persons files from 3 years ago. Abigail Rowan. Before dispatch could respond, the radio crackled sharply. Read. Lieutenant Harris's voice cut through like a blade. I told you to drop this. Daniel stiffened. Shadow growled. How did you know which case I was asking about? Daniel asked calmly. I never said the name. Another silence. Longer. Heavier. Harris spoke again, tone colder than before. You're poking your nose where it doesn't belong. I'm giving you one last warning. Get out of that cave and return to town. Daniel's grip tightened on the radio. Lieutenant, someone was here last night, and Abigail Rowan lived here. She was running from... Read, enough, Harris barked. That case is over. If she survived 3 years on her own, she doesn't need you now. Get out. The radio clicked dead. Daniel stood frozen. Survived? Harris spoke as if he knew Abigail had lived in the cave, as if he had been part of the pursuit, as if he had been there. Shadow nudged Daniel's leg urgently, then returned to the hatch leading below. He barked once, firm, insistent. Daniel understood. There was more to find down there. Evidence Harris didn't want uncovered. He knelt beside Shadow. You knew her scent from before. Did she come to town? Was she part of a case you worked on? Shadow whined, a sound layered with confusion and sadness. Daniel's breath trembled. The truth hit him like a blow. Shadow had helped search for Abigail Rowan 3 years ago. He had found trace scent trails that abruptly ended in the mountains. But now Daniel realized that trail hadn't ended. It had been buried, just like the case. Daniel drove straight back to town, the notebook tucked securely inside his jacket, Shadow sitting rigidly in the back seat. The dog wasn't relaxed. He was alert, watching the passing trees as though expecting danger to leap from the shadows at any moment. The sun was rising, but the new day didn't bring clarity, only more questions. Daniel parked behind the station, choosing the side entrance instead of the front. Fewer eyes, fewer questions. He walked briskly down the quiet hallway, Shadow's paws tapping softly behind him until he reached the records room. The door was supposed to be locked. It wasn't. A tiny red flag. Daniel pushed it open slowly. The room smelled of paper, dust, and cold metal cabinets. Rows of files stretched in every direction. Decades of police history stored in one silent archive. Daniel flipped on a small desk lamp instead of the overhead lights and moved toward the missing persons section. A.R. A.R. He whispered, scanning labels. Finally, Rowan, Abigail, case closed. He froze. The file was thin. Much too thin for a missing teenager whose trail had never been explained. Daniel opened it, a single-page summary. No interviews, no extended search notes, no maps, no evidence logs, just a short narrative. Teen likely left voluntarily, no evidence of foul play, case closed within 72 hours. 72 hours? A missing 17-year-old girl, last seen distressed, and the case was closed in 3 days? Daniel flipped the page but found nothing else. The binder should have been thicker. Shadow had tracked her scent into the mountains for days. Officers had interviewed neighbors, teachers, friends. Or, at least, they were supposed to. But none of it was here. Someone had removed everything. Daniel's heart thudded harder. He turned the page over and found something faint at the bottom, half erased but still visible. A signature. Lieutenant Harris. Shadow growled, the sound low and trembling. Daniel knelt beside him. Yeah, I'm thinking the same thing. He returned to the empty file, turning it over in the dim lamplight. A corner of the folder felt thicker, as if glued. Daniel carefully peeled it back. A photograph slid out. A frightened girl with tangled hair, standing beside a rocky cliff, staring directly into the camera with terror in her eyes. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. On the back, written in Abigail's uneven handwriting, "He found me." Shadow whimpered, a soft, mournful sound. Daniel looked around the quiet archives room, suddenly aware of the suffocating silence. Harris didn't just close the case, he buried it. And if Abigail had written this 3 years ago, she might still be running. Or she might be very, very close. Daniel and Shadow returned to the cave before noon, the weight of the forbidden file pressing on his chest like a stone. The icy mountain air felt sharper now, more unforgiving. The cave, once merely mysterious, now carried the suffocating energy of a place soaked with secrets. Terrible, buried secrets. Shadow raced ahead, tail straight, muscles tense. The moment his paws hit the cabin floor, he veered right. Not toward the hatch leading underground, but toward the rough stone wall behind the bed. Daniel blinked. Shadow hadn't focused on that wall before. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Shadow pressed his nose against the rocks, inhaling deeply. Then, with surprising force, he pawed at the base of the wall. Dust flew. Pebbles bounced. His growling picked up intensity. This wasn't curiosity. It was certainty. Daniel knelt beside him and ran his hand across the rock surface. A draft. A cold, thin stream of air seeped through the cracks. There was space behind this wall. Daniel grabbed a metal pry bar from the cabin corner, left behind by someone long ago. Maybe AR herself. He wedged it between 2 stones. The wall resisted, groaning under pressure. Then, crack. A stone piece fell forward, revealing darkness behind it. Shadow barked fiercely, tail high, body trembling with instinct. Daniel removed the loosened rocks one by one until an opening emerged, just wide enough for a person to crawl through. He raised his flashlight and pointed it inside. A second chamber. Hidden. Sealed. Forgotten. Daniel crawled in, Shadow close behind him. The chamber's air was icy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something older, something human. The beam of the flashlight revealed the remnants of a room far more desperate than the first. A broken lantern, a pile of torn fabric, a shallow stone bowl, stained with something Daniel didn't want to identify. But the real discovery lay scratched into the stone wall. A message, not carved neatly like the initials, but violently. "He works with the police." Beneath it, deeper scratches formed another message. "Don't let him find me." Shadow whimpered softly. Daniel reached out, tracing the letters with trembling fingers. Abigail had carved this. She had hidden here. She had known someone was coming, someone with authority, someone she trusted at first, then feared. Daniel's stomach knotted. At the bottom corner of the wall, half buried under dust, Shadow uncovered something with his paw, a metal tag. Daniel lifted it, brushing away dirt. A K-9 search team badge. Not old, not forgotten. Issued 3 years ago. To Shadow, which meant only one thing. Shadow had been here before, and he had led officers to this cave once, only for the search to be abruptly called off, not because the trail ended, but because someone forced it to end. Daniel's breath caught. Harris hadn't just known Abigail hid here, he had been here himself. Shadow whined again, pressing against Daniel's leg, and in that moment, Daniel understood the message Abigail had carved into the wall. She wasn't writing about a stranger. She was warning about someone in uniform, someone she had overheard, someone who worked with the police, someone who was still watching. Daniel crawled out of the hidden chamber with Shadow at his side, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. The carved warnings echoed in his mind like a drumbeat. He works with the police. Don't let him find me. The air felt heavier now, suffocating the deeper he inhaled. Every instinct screamed that he shouldn't stay here, but something else pulsed beneath that fear. Rage, determination, truth begging to surface. Daniel stood in the center of the cabin, flashlight in one hand, pry bar in the other, Shadow pacing at his feet. "We need answers," he whispered. Shadow lifted his head suddenly, ears rigid, eyes sharp. A sound echoed through the cavern's entrance. Crunch, stone on stone, footsteps. Daniel froze. Shadow growled, low and dangerous, posture shifting into immediate defense mode. Another step. Closer. Daniel reached slowly for his holstered weapon. "Show yourself," he called out. Voice steady but edged with steel. A silhouette emerged from the darkness. Broad shoulders, familiar jacket, familiar stance. The lantern light flickered across his face. Lieutenant Harris. Daniel's stomach twisted. Harris stepped deeper into the cavern, his boots echoing as if the cave itself wanted to announce his arrival. He wasn't surprised to see Daniel here. He wasn't tense. He wasn't confused. He looked prepared. "Reed," Harris said calmly, "you're a difficult man to give an order to." Shadow bared his teeth, a deep, warning growl rumbling from his chest. Harris's eyes flicked to the dog, unimpressed. "Hush, Mutt," he muttered. Shadow snapped, a sharp, vicious bark that made Harris instinctively step back. Daniel's voice hardened. "What are you doing here, Lieutenant?" Harris smirked. "Cleaning up a mistake." Daniel's grip tightened. "Abigail Rowan wasn't a runaway." "No," Harris replied, tone chillingly casual. "She was a liability." Daniel's pulse spiked. "She was a child." "She was a smart child," Harris corrected. "Too smart. She overheard things she shouldn't have, saw things she definitely shouldn't have. You have no idea how deep this goes, Reed." Daniel raised his weapon slightly. "I know she carved warnings in this cave. I know you were hunting her." Harris laughed, cold, sharp, bitter. "She thought she could outsmart me, thought she could hide in these mountains." He turned slowly, eyes scanning the cabin. "This place. I almost admired her for finding it." Shadow stepped between them, body taut. Harris clicked something behind his back. A metallic sound. Daniel tensed. "Don't." Harris revealed the gun he'd hidden behind his leg. Daniel raised his own weapon instantly. Shadow barked, furious. Harris chuckled. "Let's not pretend you're faster than me, or that your dog won't die first." "Drop it," Daniel ordered. "Drop yours," Harris countered. "You're meddling in business far above your pay grade. That girl was never supposed to be found." Daniel's jaw tightened. Shadow found her scent. He found where she lived. He always knew. Harris sneered. "Then I should have gotten rid of the dog back then, too." Shadow's growl deepened into a snarl. Harris lifted his weapon. Shadow lunged. In one explosive leap, the German Shepherd slammed into Harris's arm. The gun fired, a deafening blast echoing through the cave, before skidding across the stone floor. Harris stumbled back, cursing, clutching his torn sleeve. Daniel rushed forward, kicking the fallen gun aside. "Shadow, hold!" Shadow circled Harris, barking with a fury Daniel had only seen in life-or-death moments. Harris glared at Daniel, breathing heavily. "You're making a huge mistake." "No," Daniel said, voice steady. "You did." Footsteps thundered outside the cave. Backup Daniel had secretly called on his way in. Harris paled. Shadow barked triumphantly, and for the first time, Daniel saw fear in the eyes of the man who once led him. But fear wasn't enough. Truth needed to come next, and Abigail Rowan's story was far from finished. The cave was swarming with officers now, real officers, not the corrupt shadow Harris had cast over the department. Flashlights sliced through the darkness, radios crackled, and muffled voices echoed off the stone walls. Harris lay cuffed near the cabin doorway, seething silently, while two deputies kept watch over him. Daniel stood apart from the noise, leaning against the cabin's wooden frame. Shadow pressed close to his leg. The dog's breathing had finally steadied, but his eyes remained sharp, alert, as if still searching for someone, and Daniel knew exactly who he was searching for. Abigail Rowan. A forensics officer approached with a solemn expression. "Read. You should see this." Daniel followed him back into the hidden chamber, the one Shadow had, uncovered. Floodlights illuminated the crude walls, revealing the full depth of the girl's life in hiding. The tally marks, the broken lantern, the makeshift bed. But now, with clearer light, something else stood out, a small cloth pouch wedged into a crack in the wall. Daniel reached for it gently and untied the string. Inside were personal items: Abigail's student ID, worn and faded, a tiny bracelet made of red thread, and a torn photograph of a family standing in front of a lake. The girl in the picture, Abigail, had a slight, shy smile, innocent, a world away from the terrified handwriting in her notebook. Daniel swallowed hard. "She left these here on purpose." The forensic officer nodded. "She wanted someone to find them?" Shadow nudged Daniel's hand, sniffing the bracelet. He whined softly, a sound full of recognition and sorrow. Daniel knelt and stroked the dog's head. "You tried to find her back then, didn't you, buddy?" he whispered. "You tried, and they wouldn't let you?" Shadow pressed closer, confirming the truth. The officer cleared his throat. "There's more." He led Daniel to the back of the chamber, where deeper scratches marred the stone, newer than the others, as if Abigail had carved them shortly before abandoning the cave. Daniel traced the marks with his fingers. They weren't words at first, symbols, lines. But then the pattern became clear, an arrow pointing toward the far end of the chamber. Beneath it, 3 words etched with shaky hands. "I went north." Daniel's breath caught. North. Further into the mountain range, deeper into wilderness no search party had ever reached. Abigail wasn't dead. She wasn't taken. She was running. Surviving. Daniel straightened. "She escaped Harris," he murmured. "She hid here until she couldn't anymore. Then she moved on." Shadow barked once, sharp, hopeful. The forensic officer sighed. If she kept moving north, she might still be alive, somewhere out there. Daniel nodded slowly, determination growing inside him like a flame. She lived out here for months. She carved warnings. She left clues. She didn't run to disappear. She ran to stay alive. He looked toward Shadow, who stared at the chamber's dark passageway as if expecting someone to return at any moment. Daniel whispered, "We'll find her." Not an officer's promise, a man's promise. A promise Shadow understood completely. The cave felt different in the days that followed, less like a place of fear and more like a monument to resilience. Crime scene tape had been removed, officers had cleared out, and Harris was officially under investigation. The echo of chaos had faded, leaving behind a heavy, thoughtful silence. Daniel returned to the cave almost every afternoon, Shadow trotting proudly beside him. Each visit began the same way, Daniel pausing at the cavern entrance, taking in the strange little cabin tucked inside the mountain. It no longer looked abandoned. It looked incomplete, like a story waiting for its last chapter. He decided to restore it, not for aesthetics, not for curiosity, but for Abigail Rowan, whose courage had survived long after the world stopped looking for her. Daniel repaired the old bed frame, sanding splintered edges until they were smooth. He replaced the broken shelves, reinforcing them with sturdier wood. Dust was swept away, the floor scrubbed, the lantern polished until its glass shone again. Shadow watched each repair intently, lying nearby like a silent guardian. When Daniel finished the cabin's interior, he focused on the hidden chamber. He cleared debris respectfully, leaving the carved warnings untouched, preserved exactly as Abigail had left them. He set a small lantern beside the tally marks and placed her cloth pouch on a stone shelf, treating it like a memorial rather than evidence. "This place kept you alive," Daniel murmured softly, his voice echoing against stone. "Now it'll protect others too." He wasn't exaggerating. He'd already spoken to the department about converting the cave into a wilderness safe house, a shelter for missing youths, hikers in trouble, or anyone who needed protection. It would be registered, monitored, and honored in Abigail's name. Shadow approved. The dog patrolled the space with quiet pride, as though guarding sacred ground. Every so often he would pause at the entrance, ears lifted, scanning the tree line, as if he sensed something Daniel couldn't. One evening, after installing a sturdy wooden door and cleaning the last of the cabin windows, Daniel and Shadow sat on the rock ledge overlooking the valley. The sunset painted the sky in streaks of gold and crimson. "You feel it too, don't you?" Daniel asked softly. Shadow's ears twitched. Daniel wasn't sure what he felt, anticipation, hope, something pulling them forward. It wasn't over. Not yet. Something, or someone, was coming, and Shadow knew before Daniel did. The mountain air was crisp that late autumn morning, the kind that carried every sound clearly. Daniel and Shadow climbed the familiar path toward the cave house, a routine that had become almost meditative. The rustle of leaves, the crunch of soil beneath their boots, the distant call of birds, it all blended into a calm Daniel had rarely known. He didn't expect anything unusual that day, but Shadow did. The German shepherd froze halfway up the trail, ears locked forward, nose twitching rapidly. His tail stiffened, not with fear, something else. Recognition, anticipation. "What is it, boy?" Daniel whispered. Shadow didn't bark. Instead, he walked slowly ahead, posture low but unafraid, every muscle focused on the cave entrance. Daniel followed, heart beginning to race. As they approached the cavern, light flickered strangely, like shadows were moving inside the cabin. Daniel reached instinctively for his weapon, but something held him back. Shadow wasn't acting defensive. He was acting hopeful. They stepped inside, and there, standing near the restored bed, was a figure. A girl, thin, pale, wrapped in layers of worn fabric. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, tangled but familiar. She froze when she saw them, eyes wide, frightened at first, then softening when her gaze landed on Shadow. Shadow whimpered. He stepped forward slowly, head tilted, tail trembling with emotion. The girl took a shaky breath. "Shadow?" Her voice cracked, fragile, disbelieving. Daniel felt his heart squeeze. "Abigail?" She turned to him, tears gathering instantly in her eyes. She nodded, barely able to speak. I saw the lights here again. I didn't know if it was safe. I didn't know if they were gone." Daniel stepped forward gently, hands open, voice steady. "You're safe now. Harris is under arrest. The case is open again. We've been looking for you." Abigail pressed a hand over her mouth, overwhelmed. Shadow reached her first, leaning gently against her legs. She dropped to her knees, sobbing into his fur. "You found me." "Again," she whispered. Shadow licked her hand, tail swishing weakly, an emotional reunion years overdue. Daniel lowered himself beside her. "How did you survive out there?" Abigail wiped her eyes. "I kept moving. The mountains have places no one goes. I hid near rivers, lived off berries, small traps." She glanced around the cabin. "I came back here sometimes, just to feel less alone." Daniel exhaled shakily. "You were incredibly strong." "No," Abigail whispered. "I was scared every day. I thought no one believed me." Daniel looked at her firmly. "I believe you. Shadow believed you from the start." Abigail stroked the dog's fur. "He always did." Shadow leaned closer, letting out a deep, almost relieved sigh. Daniel spoke softly. "Everything you wrote, every warning, every clue, it helped us uncover the truth. Harris won't hurt anyone again, and we'll make sure no one buries your story." Abigail hugged herself, trembling. "I didn't think I'd ever hear that." Daniel extended a hand. "Come with us. We'll get you food, warmth, medical care, and a life back." She hesitated, glancing around the cave one last time. "This place saved me," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "And now it's time for us to save you." Abigail took his hand. As they stepped into the daylight, Shadow walked proudly between them, head high, tail sweeping in confident arcs. He kept glancing at Abigail as if reassuring himself she was truly there. Daniel paused at the edge of the trail, taking in the breathtaking view of the valley below. "This is your new beginning," he said gently. Abigail nodded. "Thanks to him." Shadow barked once, bright, joyful. Daniel smiled. "If you were moved by this journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And turn on notifications for more real stories of survival, courage, and the unbreakable bond between humans and heroes like Shadow." Shadow wagged his tail, and for the first time in years, Abigail Rowan walked toward a future not defined by fear, but by hope.